the Wells Fargo branch that I like going into is actually inside the Safeway near my house, which is funny because I almost never go to Safeway. But I love the manager of this Wells Fargo branch, even though it's in Safeway. So about a year ago, this one guy was helping me, and he had these tattoos on his literally his fingers, lots of tattoos. And so I was passing judgment on him in my brain, and I was asking him like, "Oh, what's that? What's that tattoo?" He's like, "Oh, that's one for my mom." And I didn't think anything else of it. I didn't ask him anything else of it, and I was like, "That's kind of weird to have like tattoos on your fingers for your mom." And I put a lot of judgment on him, and I knew I was, and I was like, God, I have a lot of judgment about that. Well, about a year later, which was this past week, I'm like, I want to connect with this guy. He's been at this bank for at least a year now. I've been seeing him, and I just want to connect with him. So, you can visibly, his tattoos are visible. And I said, oh, I knew that one tattoo was about his mom. And I said, how's your mom? And he looks at me and goes, what do you mean? I said, well, last time I talked with you, which was about a year ago, I asked you about your tattoos on your fingers, and you said, "Oh, this one's about my mom." And I was like, "Oh, I wanted to know about your mom." He goes, "My mom died when I was 8." I'm like, "Oh my god." Like what did I get myself into? And I'm like, I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know that. We spoke a year ago and you told me about this tattoo and some other tattoos that were about your mom, and I wanted to connect with you." And I mean, it was interesting was I didn't have any defense up, and it was genuine. Like, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that. He goes, "Yeah, my mom died when I was 8." I was like, "Man, I'm sorry." Like, he goes, "I'm the only one left." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, my dad died 3 years ago of a heart attack. And my brother died in a DUI 2 years ago. He wasn't driving, but died in a DUI 2 years ago." I said, "Well, what about aunts or uncles or cousin?" He goes, "No, it's just me." And I said, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know. I'm sorry." And it was actually a very neutral conversation for both of us, but it just made me feel bad. So as soon as I got in the car, I called my mom. And I called my mom and dad. I'm like, "Hey guys, just calling to say hello." And then I called them the next day, and then I called them the next day, and my mom's like, "Is everything okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, everything's fine. I want to make sure I connect with you guys this week." And it was just a nice, though odd and uncomfortable, and I felt really bad for him. How precious things can really be, and how interesting things become precious only after the moment. With my mom having stage 3 cancer last year, and now Burgess's dad, my wife, Burgess's dad having pretty bad cancer this year. We just learned about it a week ago. Just how precious things can become. And I'll get back to that at the end. I do actually want to talk about one thing with investing, which kind of has to do with emotions also, and appreciating what you have has to do with emotions. But my thought for this week for you in this holiday weekend, at least for most people, it's a holiday weekend in the United States, is that morality can be really expensive. And I had a conversation with a good friend of mine this week on the phone, and we were kind of getting into it. And I didn't know really why. Um, and I think he was expecting me to think that I was a hyperinflationist, or I had to have certain things happen in the future. I'm like, I don't care what happens. I just want to be on the right side of it. And I said, from a moral point of view, I don't think the stock market should be going up. And from a moral point of view, I don't think gold should be in the 1200s. But that's from a moral point of view. I mean, no one calls me to ask me what is or is not moral about how Wall Street operates and runs. And we just got into this actually nice conversation about how morality can be really expensive. And, whether the stock market should or should not be going up, it is going up right now. And an investment is nothing ever more or less than its trend. James Grant was on the news. And if you don't know who James Grant is, he's just a great, great, great viewer and interpreter of what's happening in the stock market. But he said, gold is nothing more than its trend. And what was great about that is the guy didn't really get it. And my belief is no investment is ever more than its direction that it's moving. Now, whether you're looking at it on a 1 minute scale or a 1 year scale or a 10-year scale, but the things you invest in are never more than the direction. That's it. And if we can simplify it down to there and delete all the noise, things become much, much, much clearer. Now, my chart of the week end is a chart of GDX, and I zoomed way in on this. This is actually an intraday chart of GDX showing this is either like a 2-hour chart. So each little open, high, low, close bar you see is a 2-hour. And that horizontal line going across is the low of GDX on June 26th of this year. And as you can see over the last couple days, GDX has broken below that June 26th low and is hitting or getting now resistance on that June 26th low. So this is a pretty important point for, I think, precious metals. Now I'm using GDX right now. So whether it's physical or precious metal mining, but when you see something that is bouncing off an important number, an important price, you want to take note. And right now, GDX has bounced twice. Now this is intraday, so we could, see something change next week. But notice this price right here, notice this price right here, notice this price right here, and notice this price right here. Those 4 prices, generally speaking, all bounced off the same number. And GDX has fallen through this number, and now this number has now formed kind of a ceiling, which before it was more of a floor. So what I'm watching, which you don't need to watch, but I'm just kind of pointing out to where my attention is going this weekend, other than giving thanks for my parents being alive and sharing that with you, is really watching what happens with GDX. Because if this forms a ceiling and starts moving down, that means the next major point for GDX is about 33% away at about $15. And there's no big support between $22 and $15. And so you're going to want to be aware of that. And don't let morality get the best of you on what should or should not be happening. Thanksgiving weekends are more complicated for me than they used to be because I have 2 just loving, gorgeous, sometimes out of control kids and a marriage and lots of responsibility. But if you followed me for any amount of time, you know that every night, Burgess and I, before we go to bed, we give thanks to 5 things that we have in our life. And even if the day's been crappy, and I'm in a poopy mood or a sour mood or upset with Burgess, even forcing myself to say the 5 things I'm thankful for out loud or even in my mind really helps me reframe what's going on. Because, a lot of times we can get really stuck in our emotions and, oh, poor me, and this is bad. But giving thanks for 5 things, sometimes I give thanks for doing LASIK 10 years ago and having good eyesight for the last 10 years, being thankful for not having a head cold, being thankful for being able to pick up the phone and still call my parents. Things that make me go, wow, I've got a lot. Being thankful for my 2 beautiful, amazing kids, even though today Bone was an absolute out of control, crying, whining little 6-year-old. I'm like, I'm so thankful I have him. So giving thanks is so powerful. I thank you for being in my world. I thank you for listening to these podcasts, and give thanks for what you have, and I'll be speaking with you next week. You guys take care, and I'll talk to you then.